It's the blue collar breakdown! Welcome to the blue collar breakdown! Starting right now!
Welcome to the Get Myself on Stage. Here we go. Here we go. Stage. I'm not on stage. What's that all about? Let's see. Okay, let's move that. Oh, there we go. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about America's vestigial constitution tonight, but I just wanted to start with a couple of quick notes about Charlie Kirk. I liked some of what he said, disliked other stuff of what he said. Doesn't matter. He shouldn't have been killed for what he said. Whether he said what I agreed with or whether I didn't agree with it, doesn't matter. There's no way to stop someone who's trying to kill a regular citizen if the person is insane. And I think that's what's the case here. So I don't think gun control is the solution. It's not going to solve it. There are murders in countries with gun control. It's not going to solve the problem. I've seen a lot of, how do I put this? I've seen a lot of people say, especially with the case in Charlotte, where this beautiful blonde Ukrainian woman was killed by a guy on the subway, and people are saying, we don't have to live like this. And in a sense, that's not true, because we're all fallible human beings, and there are going to be people who make those bad choices. But in a sense, there is a truth to that. We can choose to follow the light. We could choose to fall in line with God and not sin. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. It will happen in the next world, but it's not going to happen in our lifetime. But it is something to shoot at, and it's something that I shoot for, and I hope you do too. But that's about all I have to say. I almost feel guilty saying I want to pray for Charlie Kirk and his wife and his family and everything, because I don't know that he is necessarily more or less deserving than anyone else who's murdered. And he happens to be famous, and he's really good at what he did. He was a really talented political organizer, and he was able to do a lot of things that most people aren't able to do in his short 31 years. So I guess maybe in that sense, because he was an innovator and he was something special, even if you didn't like what he said. And like I said, sometimes he was too deferential to the Israeli genocide in Gaza. He was too deferential to Republican administrations. He was a big time Republican, and that's not my tribe. Neither is my tribe, the Democratic Party. My tribe is the Libertarian Party, but only because, in my view, it's the right tribe. Okay, so I've just badmouthed the Republicans and Democrats. Let me go on a little bit more about the Republicans right now and talk about our vestigial constitution, because the Republicans are the party in power. We have a bipartisan system in America. We have the stupid party and the evil party. And right now, the Democratic Party is the stupid party. They're the party that's too stupid to come to power. And the evil party is the party that's in power, which happens at this moment to be the Republicans. A year ago, it was reversed. A year ago, the Republicans were the stupid party and the Democrats were the evil party. But now we have the Republicans in power. So they are now the evil party. I will say this. Donald Trump, just like Charlie Kirk, ran on some good things. He promised to pardon Russ Ulbricht, and he did. He promised to end wars, and he didn't. In fact, he started 3 new ones, right? He's bombed Yemen. He's bombed Somalia, breaking his own record of how many bombs he's dropped on Somalia. He's bombed Iran. And a couple weeks ago, what was that, September 3rd? He bombed a Venezuelan boat in the Caribbean. So that's 4 countries in just 8 months, 9 months, 8 months, 8.5 months. That's a lot for a presidential candidate who made fun of Joe Biden for bombing Yemen, saying we shouldn't be doing that. And then he goes and does it. It just doesn't make any sense. Okay. Let's dispense with the rightness or wrongness of all of this for a moment, from the standpoint of what is it, whether or not it's good policy. Let's talk about whether Donald Trump, and we'll also cover a little bit about Joe Biden before him, whether he's a good president under the Constitution. Let's use the U.S. Constitution as the standard, because I'm going to make the case tonight that Donald Trump is the worst president in American history when it comes to being measured up against the limits of the U.S. Constitution. The worst president in American history. Worse than FDR, worse than Lincoln, worse than Joe Biden, worse than Obama, worse than George W. Bush. Those are a couple of the worst. Yes, worse than Woodrow Wilson. I think I've covered all the worst ones. But let's measure him up against the Constitution, okay? And I have some sections of the Constitution loaded up here. So, well, let's do the war thing, because this relates to both Biden and Trump. All right. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump bombed a number of countries. I think there was the same number so far. I mean, but Trump bombed more countries in his first term than he has in his second term so far. I think he bombed six or 7 countries in his first term. Biden bombed 4 countries, and Trump has so far bombed 4 countries. Let's look at how that stacks up against the Constitution. Who gets to do that according to the U.S. Constitution? All right, if you look at Article 1, Section 8, it begins, Congress shall have the power to, and then there's all of these other phrases after it. To lay and collect taxes, to borrow money on the credit of the U.S., blah, 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 big, long list. And if you scroll down Article 1, Section 8, all right, if you scroll down there, one of the things you find is the powers of Congress include to declare war, to grant letters of marque and reprisal, to make rules considering captures on land and water. Like if you've got drugs coming in, if you've got smugglers coming in. I mean, there were smugglers in the 18th century. They put that into the Constitution. To raise and support armies, to make a navy, to make rules for the government of the land and naval forces, to call up the militia. Well, we'll get to Trump calling the militia in a moment. And to provide for organizing, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now, to bomb another country is to engage in an act of war. I think, I mean, we can call it anything else we want, but it's an act of war. It is the responsibility, as George Washington said, for the chief executive, for the president, to keep the nation in a state of peace with other nations until Congress alone arrests that status. That's the job of the president. Going back to George Washington in the Federalist Papers, if you read Federalist 69, 70, 71, they're all about how the president cannot declare war any more than a general in running the U.S. Army base in Germany can declare war on Poland, or a German, the general in Poland can invade Belarus. He cannot do that. He is only the first general. And as the first general, he is subject to the U.S. Constitution. So Donald Trump, and before him, Joe Biden, and before him, Barack Obama, or I should say before him, Trump again, but then Barack Obama, almost all of the presidents going back really to my lifetime have all done this without authorization from Congress. I think probably the only one in my lifetime who didn't do it, maybe Gerald Ford. I'm not sure. But Jimmy Carter even did some work in Afghanistan. So, I mean, they've all done it. So this is an old part of the Constitution, but it's a key part of the Constitution because one of the greatest oppressions is war, both from the physical perspective because soldiers die, but also from the economic perspective, because in many instances, the entire society is regimented. You pay heavy taxes as a result to pay for the war. So it's one of the key powers of Congress. One of the key debates in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 was, where do we put the power of the sword and the power of the purse? These two great powers. And they decided to put them in the hands of Congress. Okay. Congress has these powers, not the legislative, not the executive branch. Now, the executive branch does have powers. And it says here, if you look, let me see if I can put this up. Okay. The president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and the militia. Oh, well, he's commander-in-chief. He can do whatever he wants? No. When called into the service of the United States. Okay. Now, is that just referring to the militia of the United States? When the militia gets called into the service, he can call the militia? No. Congress must call it. So when President Trump calls the militia into service in Washington, D.C., in Los Angeles, or in Chicago, as they're talking about, that is an unconstitutional act because it is required of Congress. Let's go back to the section here on the powers of Congress, okay? Who makes rules for the government of the land and naval forces? Right here, right where my finger's pointing. To make rules for the government of land and naval forces. To provide for calling forth of the militia. Right there, right below it. That's what it says. Not to suppress insurrections and repel invasions, okay? Congress calls that, not President Trump. And yet Trump is doing it without Congress. Congress didn't call for the National Guard to be called out in Washington, D.C., or in the city of Los Angeles or in Chicago. Nope, President Trump is doing that all by himself. Biden didn't do that. This makes Trump objectively worse than Biden, at least in this respect. Oh, but there's more. Let's go back a little bit further in the U.S. Constitution. Let's go back to Article 1, Section 1, okay? It says here, this is the very beginning of the Constitution, right after the preamble, and it says, all legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. All lawmaking power in the federal government is congressional. The president cannot make any laws. None. Okay? That should be pretty simple. But guess what? The founding fathers were in nothing for taxes. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. Okay, and then it goes on, but the president, the Senate can propose, in the bills, all laws for raising revenue have to begin in the House of Representatives. So can President Trump, as he did recently, just raise taxes on Japan as he did? This is from the White House just a few weeks ago, or maybe less than a week ago. He says, and he's boasting here, under the agreement, the United States will apply a baseline 15% tariff on nearly all Japanese imports entering the United States. Can the president just raise taxes? No, no, it cannot. All right. Again, if you go back to Article 1, Section 8. Now, Article 1, Section 7 says all bills raising revenue have to begin in the House of Representatives. But it says here, powers of Congress, right at the beginning. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts is imports, okay, and excises, and to pay the debts and whatever, okay? So Trump does not have the constitutional power to raise taxes. That's why all of these tariffs, as I went over last week, for those of you who are managed to get through it, all of these taxes are going to be repealed, and probably most of them will be refunded to the foreign importers who had to pay them. So President Trump was boasting about all this revenue that's coming in. And remember, again, Article 1, Section 7 says all bills for raising revenue have to begin in the House of Representatives. He's boasting, oh, it's raising all this money. Well, it's all that money, by the way, is going to be gone. So I suppose in a sense, it's not unconstitutional because it's not going to raise any money. It's all going to have to be refunded. But it's an attempt by the president to take away that power of the purse, the power to tax from Congress. And it's also an attempt to take away from Congress power to spend. Here's a story. It's on MSNBC. I know. I hate MSNBC. They're almost always wrong. This is one of the few times where they're actually kind of in a way right. And it was all about how the president has issued what they're calling a pocket rescission. Now, there's no such term in the U.S. Constitution, but basically what it is this. It says that the president has the power to spend or not spend. And this is what needs to be spent. The president sees it as kind of up, and thus he can take money away from cancer research, which I support because I don't think the federal government should be doing research. If you find out that I'm very much against government research. By the way, speaking of research, and the Libertarian Institute, I would strongly encourage you to go to Libertarian Institute. Much of the podcast today is based on the article that the Libertarian Institute published yesterday called America's Vestigial Constitution. And you can read about it. And there's a nice little chart there, this little chart here going back. I talked about the different parts of the U.S. Constitution that have been usurped by the last two presidents. You can see war making and spending and lawmaking, because President Trump has decided to make his own laws, and he's not allowed to do that. All laws must begin in Congress. But Biden did the same thing with his COVID vaccine mandates and his student loan forgiveness. They both did their process as well. I mean, we go back. We have this long history in the United States, going back to our British ancestors, of having trial by jury to determine guilt. We don't rely on whatever the government says of if someone's guilty. If the president says someone's a drug trafficker, well, we don't punish him just because the president says so. We bring him before court, and we let a jury of 12 regular people do that. It's called a trial, and it goes all the way back to the Magna Carta over 800 years ago. Over 800? Well, was it 12? Yeah, over 800 years ago. 1215. So President Trump and President Biden both have obviated that. They basically, rather than try to capture people that we accuse them, and in Trump's recent case with the Venezuelan boat, he didn't even pretend to try. I mean, in the old days, and by the old days, I mean March of this year, when the Coast Guard interdicted a drug shipment they would just shoot out on the high seas. They would just shoot a depleted uranium shell right through the engine block of the motor of the boat that was driving the drugs, and they'd be dead on the water, and then they would take them prisoner, bring them to court, and then have intelligence for the next drug raid. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the drug war. I'm not at all a fan of drug war, but if you want to fight drugs, you probably shouldn't get rid of all witnesses and all the intelligence just by bombing it all. That is not the way to do it. But more importantly, if you're measuring according to the Constitution, because everyone is entitled to right to a trial by jury, then you would arrest them and bring them before court and charge them. And if the president has the evidence, he would be able to convict them if he has the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And if he doesn't have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, if there's doubt, then why is he executing them? And, go down here, regulations for the armed forces. President Trump had a military transgender ban. I don't think the military should go along with the pretend of transgenderism. I mean, if someone wants to pretend they're a gender other than what they're born with, that's up to them. But the military shouldn't go along with the pretending. But that doesn't mean we should just necessarily drum them out. They should be, if they want to be in the military, they should just be able to be addressed as they otherwise would be in their biological gender. Deploying the National Guard, we talked over in taxation. We talked over about, so I'm going to remove that. Really, there we go. That really worry me. I have a lot of radical documents in my library. I have the Communist Manifesto, and right next to the Communist Manifesto, I have this little book here. I don't know if you can see it. Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. All right. And in it, he defines what he calls the leadership principle. George W. Bush's people called it the unitary executive, which is a phrase from he is the guy who is in charge of enforcing the laws, the leadership principle under the traditional viewpoint. But here's what Adolf Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, and I think this is worth remembering, because increasingly I see a lot of Trump supporters, and 1 year ago, Biden supporters, saying this is basically the U.S. Constitution. I mean, it's a German translation, obviously. It will not be possible to dispense with those corporations which today we designate as parliaments, legislatures, right? But their counselors will then actually give counsel. Responsibility, however, can and may be borne only by one man, and therefore only he alone may possess the authority and the right to command. That's the leadership principle there. And that is what the Republicans are saying today, and what the Democrats were saying a year ago. Oh, well, Biden says it's so. It must be so. And you get that a lot from these Trump saying, I am going to change the name of the Secretary of Defense to the Secretary of War. And he does kind of do a little hedge here. But notice the beginning here. It says, in the beginning of the proclamation, he says, by the authority vested in me as president, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Okay, none of it gives him the right to change any of that designation. None of it. In fact, the Secretary of Defense was created by the National Defense, what's the name of the act back in 1947 that created our current thing? Because it used to be the Department of War. Now it's going to be Department of War again, although, and to a certain extent, it's more honest, but it is not more constitutional. And the interesting thing is how he gets around it. He basically says, you see the highlighted part here, the Secretary of Defense is authorized to the use of this additional secondary title, the Secretary of War. In other words, I'm just creating another word for it, but I'm going to change the law. This is what he tries to do. But I think the most important part is this part at the top, by the authority vested in me as president of the United States, because he does this he did this with the Japanese trade agreement as well. If I go back to that, I don't think I clipped it, but let's see. The Japanese trade agreement. Yeah, I don't think that's I don't think the part of it where he says by the authority of me, I think you can even see a little bit of of the clip that I used. You could see a little bit of it. It says here is hereby amended. This law is hereby amended. Proclamation of this. He's amending other executive orders. And, he does cite a law, but the law does not allow him to raise taxes on Japanese imports. In fact, one of the things the Supreme Court has covered over the past is, let's say Congress decides, oh, well, we're just going to give our power to the president. Can they do it? The answer to that is, according to the Supreme Court, unanimous, by the way, back in 1935, is no. This was a case where the Roosevelt administration had created the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, the other NRA, and it had said, hey, really make all these rules. We want the president to kind of make up some rules about how to how much a burlesque act is. I'm like this. They literally made these rules, and one of the guys and they required the chickens to be sold in lots of, I think it was 50 or 100, I forget, because they wanted to have a uniform price for chickens. And let's face it, a fat chicken is not as good as a skinny chicken because there's more meat on the fat chicken. So this poultry customers pick the chickens and screw the Washington. They can't tell me how to run my business. And it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, among other things, Congress cannot delegate legislative power to the president to exercise an unfettered discretion to make whatever law he thinks he may be needed or advisable to the rehabilitation and expansion of trade and industry. And this is, of course, what President Trump brags about with the Japanese trade agreement, right? It's gonna have all kinds of extra trade. Isn't that wonderful? So let's see if I can put myself back up here. I don't know if my camera's not working. Oh, well. But you can hear me. And I'm just about done. I have one more last minute rant here about the unitary executive and leadership principle. Washington, the problem in Washington is the executive branch, just like it's the problem and the threat of tyranny is always the executive branch. It is always the executive branch. Hitler did not come from the Reichstag. He came from the chancellorship. Caesar did not come from the Senate. He came from the consuls. The military dictators in the Latin America in the late 19th century did not come from the legislatures. They came from the executive branch and the military, which is the executive branch. Okay, so across all of history, the executive branch is the real threat to liberty. If you want to protect liberty, you have to really manage the executive branch and keep it wrapped up and relatively powerless. And that's not the case in America today. All right, I'm going to finish up there, especially since my camera has died out. So We'll see you next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And once again, here is your outro.